Okay, so on these problems, we're going to use our steps, our 5 steps that we first talked about. We're also going to use our definition of the words consecutive and then any other English to algebra translations and try to solve these problems. So step 1 told us to define our variables. So when I read this problem, find two consecutive integers whose product is. Okay, I have a directive. I'm trying to find two integers. My directive that they're asking me to do is to find. So the first step says let x be equal to some variable that I don't know. What is the thing that I'm looking for? Well, I'm looking for an integer. I'm looking for two numbers. So I'm just going to say let x be the first number. And whenever you see that word consecutive integers, we automatically can know what our second integer is going to be because we just talked about this. If it's consecutive integers, it's going to be x and x plus 1. That's step 1. Define the thing you don't know, give it a letter. Now, if you don't like x, you can always use p or b or whatever letter you like. I'm just going to continue to use x because that's something normally that we use. Step 2 says draw a picture. Well, I can't draw a picture for these number problems, so I'm going to skip that one. Step 3 says to write an equation. So I have to go back through and reread the problem and see if I can't write with my variables an equation. Find two consecutive integers. Okay, these are my two consecutive integers. Whose product? Remember what product means? Product means multiply. And who am I multiplying? Well, the two consecutive integers that we just talked about. So I have x times x plus 1. Notice because x plus 1 is a binomial, he needs to be in parentheses. Then comes the word is. Do you remember what is means in our English to algebra translation? Equals, and then 132. So this is step 3. I have written my equation. Step 4 says to solve the equation. Well, this is the work step. This is the stuff that we've been practicing over the last couple of lessons, so I know how to do this part. So we get x squared plus x minus 132 equals 0. You can solve this quadratic any of the 4 ways, right? If you wanted to try factoring or square root method, which isn't going to work for this one, completing the square or quadratic formula, you can choose. But I like to factor if I can factor. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 132 and add to 1. I think that one would be 11 and 12. Because 11 times 12 is 132, and they add to a positive 1. So it looks like there should be a plus on the 12 and a minus on the 11. To solve, I'm going to set each of those factors equal to 0. I'm going to get x equals negative 12 and x equals 11. Okay, now, are those my two consecutive integers? Well, negative 12 and positive 11 aren't consecutive at all. So what did I do here? Did I make a mistake? Well, no. What did I do? I solved for x. And what is x? X was the first number. So these are basically two potential first numbers. So what I want to do now is try to see what its corresponding second number should be. If the first number is negative 12, I can either put it into the second number's equation, which is x plus 1. If I add 1 to both sides, that gets me negative 11. So negative 12 and negative 11 seem like they're a pair. I haven't quite checked it yet. And then on the other one, if x is a positive 11 is my first number, then my second number would be x plus 1, which is 12. The other thing you could do is just think about it. If 11 is your number, what's the next one after that? If you know what the definition of consecutive integers is, you probably can just think about it that way too. So my two answers are negative 12 and negative 11 as a pair, and 11 and 12 as a pair. So you have two sets of answers. Now, step 5 tells you to check with the words. Well, there's no inches or years or pennies or whatever we're talking about. We're talking about numbers. These are numbers. These are sufficient answers. But let's go ahead and check. When I go back and read with the words, find two consecutive integers. Are these consecutive integers? Yep. Do they multiply to positive 132? They certainly do. How about the next ones? Are they consecutive? Sure. Do they multiply to 130? Yep. So both of them check out. And I know I've got my answers. Some students might look at this problem and be like, oh, I know the answer. It's 11 and 12. A lot of students will be able to get that in their head if you know your multiplication facts really well. But not very many students would think about the negative parts. So be careful and try not to do these in your head and then make some mistakes and forget some other possible answers. On our next problem, we have find two consecutive odd integers. Consecutive odd integers whose product is 35. Every time I see consecutive even or consecutive odd, I'm going to know what my variables are going to be. I'm going to let x equal my first number, and then my second number is going to be x plus 2. Because of the word odd, or even for that matter, is going to be x and x plus 2. Step 2 says draw a picture. Can't do that. Step 3 says write an equation. Find two consecutive odd integers whose product. Okay, that word product means multiply. And who am I multiplying? Well, the subject of this sentence, which is the consecutive odd integers, is. What does that word is mean? That's equals 35. So I've now written my equation. Step 4, this is the work step. This one takes a little bit of time. But this is what we've been practicing for the last couple lessons. So I'm going to subtract 35 on both sides. And I think I can factor this one as well. Is that 5 and 7? With a positive on the 7 and negative on the 5. So I'm going to set each of those factors equal to 0. Okay, positive 5 and negative 7. Are those consecutive odd integers? Well, no, they're not. They're way far away from each other on the number line. So these are not consecutive integers. But that's okay because I didn't solve for consecutive integers. I solved for x. And who is x? Well, just the first number. It's a good thing I wrote this down, huh? If I hadn't have written that down, by the time I get to the end of the problem, I'm like, I don't remember what x was. But you can always go back and write down exactly what x is. So in order to find the second number, I've got to find the next consecutive odd after 5, which is going to be plus 2. So if I add 5 plus 2, that gets me 7. So 5 and 7 seem to be some answers. I'm just going to make sure by checking in a minute. Well, what if my first number was negative 7? What is the next consecutive odd after negative 7? Well, to get that, you take negative 7 plus 2 and get negative 5. So negative 7 and negative 5 also seem to be a good pair of answers. To be sure, let's check our answers. The question, going all the way back to the words, don't check with step 3. Because if you wrote step 3 wrong, then checking with step 3 is going to make you feel like you got your answer right. Go back and check with the words. Find two consecutive odds. Are these consecutive and odd? Yes. Are these consecutive and odd? Yes. Okay. Whose product is 35? Okay, does 5 times 7 equal 35? It sure does. Does negative 7 times negative 5 equal 35? It sure does. You don't really have to write down your check. I'm just making sure I'm writing it down so you guys can see what I'm thinking. Alright, the third problem here, it says the sum of squares of two consecutive even integers is 140. Find the integers. Okay, I see these words two consecutive integers right here. When I am doing step 1, which is to define my variables, I'm going to let x equal my first number, and then because it says consecutive even, I'm going to have x plus 2 be my second number. Okay, step 2 says, is there a picture to be drawn? Well, not just yet. These are still number problems, so I don't think there's an opportunity to draw a picture here. Step 3 says write an equation. So I need to go and write the equation from the words. The English to algebra translation will help me here. The sum. Okay, stop right there. The sum. It says sum, so I'm going to put a plus sign. I'm not sure what I'm adding at the moment. I have to keep reading to figure that out. But as soon as you know something, stop reading and put what I want you to know. So it says the sum of the squares. Okay, so I'm squaring things. And what is it that I'm squaring? Let's keep reading. The sum of the squares of two consecutive even integers. So my consecutive even integers were x being squared, because it says I'm going to square them, and x plus 2 being squared, because it says I'm squaring them. So the sum of the squares of two consecutive even integers, which we said were x and x plus 2, is, what does that word is mean? That's equals, and then 340. Find the integers. Okay, so I've now gotten my equation. Next, I'm going to distribute the x plus 2 binomial squared. I really can't do that in my head unless you've memorized the formula for it. Otherwise, you'll miss the middle term. So I'm just going to go ahead and write it out longhand. X squared plus 2x plus 2x plus 4. Add like terms, I'm getting 2x squared, 4x plus 4 equals 340. And then the last thing I want to do is set the equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 340 from both sides to get, let's come up here, 2x squared plus 4x minus 336. Okay, we want to try to factor or use complete the square or quadratic formula here. It kind of looks like I have a GCF of 2, doesn't it? That's going to save me a whole lot of time here. So 336 breaks down into 168. So I need the products of 168. Okay, so once I've got my list of factors of 168, it looks like 14 and 12 are going to work. So I have x plus 14 and x minus 12. I set each of the factors with an x in it. If it doesn't have an x in it, it doesn't really need to be set equal to 0. For example, this 2, I could set it equal to 0, but there is no such time that 2 equals 0 because it doesn't have a variable in it. I don't need to have to solve for it. So I have 2 answers here. Now, are these consecutive even? No, they're not, but that's okay because I didn't solve for the consecutive even. I solved for x, and x is merely the first number. So if my first number is negative 14, the next one after that would just be 2 more than it, which is negative 12 as my second number. Well, what if my first number was x equals positive 12? Well, then 2 more after that would be 14. So I have negative 14 and negative 12, or I have 12 and 14. Let's see if those work. The sum of the squares of two consecutive even integers. Are these consecutive and even? Sure they are. Are these consecutive and even? Yes, they are. Now, if I square negative 14 and I add it to negative 12 squared, I should expect 340. Let's try that. Negative 14 squared is 14 times 14 or 96. Negative 12 times negative 12 is positive 144. When I add 196 and 144, I'm getting 340. Look at that, folks. Is that just not impressive? And it works for the other one as well. Excellent. So we have checked our work. That was step 5 down here. that we were checking. We've solved our problem, and we have found the integers. There's two sets of possible integers that will solve this problem.